Okay, I think there might be a few more people joining us, but I'm very conscious of everybody's time and that it's a Friday, so we'll get started with this morning's Working Families webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's webinar is all about learning from lockdown, and it is particularly about focusing on flexible working in Flux. It's part of Working Families Flex the UK campaign, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. First of all, let's do introductions. So you'll hear who I am and who our panelists for today are. And also I'll talk a little bit about how this morning's session is going to run. So my name is Helen Tupper. I am the co-founder of an organisation called Amazing If. We focus on career development and making work better for people. I'm also a trustee for the Working Families charity. And if you haven't come across Working Families before, maybe this is the first session that you've come to, or first you've heard about Working Families, just a little bit about our mission as a charity. So our mission is to make a positive impact in the workplace by connecting and collaborating with parents and carers, with employers, and also with policy makers. And I'm delighted for this webinar that I'm joined by 4 brilliant panelists. I'm going to introduce them very briefly for you because we're going to get straight into the discussions today. And they're going to give you a wave so that you can see them, but we are going to be hearing more from them throughout this session today. So first up, we have got Hee-Jung Chung. Hee-Jung is the reader in sociology and social policy at the University of Kent. Good morning, Hee-Jung.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. We've also got Emma Jacobs. Emma is a writer for the Financial Times on the topic of work and careers. Morning, Emma. It's the joy of mute.
Hi.
So we're hearing more about Emma and some of the really interesting articles that she's been sharing all around this topic of flex and flux and the roles and the impact on different people in that. We've also got Jennifer Thomas. Morning, Jennifer.
Morning, everyone. Morning.
Jennifer is the former Director of Internal Communications and Experience at the Direct Line Group, also a trustee of Working Families as well. And last but not least, we've got Julia Waltham. Morning, Julia.
Morning.
And Julia is the Joint Head of Policy and Influencing at Working Families, and she's going to be kicking us off in a minute, sharing some of Working Families' latest research on flexible working. So let's just talk about how this morning's session is going to work. As I said, Julia will kick us off with a bit of research and sharing some of the latest insights. Then we're going to go into a discussion with our panelists, hear a bit about their research, their perspectives, their insights, their experiences. I've got a couple of questions to tease that out, and then I'm going to hand over to you. You will be able to ask our panelists questions. There is a Q&A function on Zoom. It's towards the bottom of your screen somewhere. So at any point, if you're thinking, oh, I'd really like to know a bit more about Hee-Jung's perspective on this, or Jennifer mentioned that, I'd like to understand what she thinks about this, just put it into the Q&A function, and then towards the end of the session, I'll be putting those questions to our panelists. If it is for a specific person, please let me know who you would like that question to go to. And of course, if you could leave your name, that means I can kind of signpost to you too. So again, thanks for joining us. I hope you find this really insightful, really useful. I hope you can take back insights into your own work so that we can make flexible working the norm for everybody. And I'm now going to hand over to Julia to get us started.
Morning, everyone. I'm not going to take up too much time because I know we've only got an hour and so much to talk about. But I'm just going to share some slides with you that, as Helen said, will hopefully tease out some of what's going on for working parents and carers through the current pandemic. As I said, I'm Joint Head of Policy and Influencing. I job share, which is an absolutely brilliant way of working. I would highly recommend it to anyone. So just going to give you a bit of context first. So Working Families does a piece of research annually called the Modern Families Index. It's a study of more than 2,500 parents. And prior to COVID, we know that 45% of working parents did not work flexibly. Of those, more than 3/4 indicated they wanted to. But what's really interesting is that of the parents not working flexibly, almost a third reported that it was not available where they work. And that, to me, suggests a kind of almost a cultural ban in that workplace on flexible working. Don't ask for it. It's not available. So rewind, back to March, that dark day. For some people it might have been a happy day. It was quite a sad day for me when schools closed, childcare settings closed. So 1 in 7 workers in the UK was affected by that. What I really want to share with you today is that we've recently surveyed working parents and carers, and there's other research out there as well that shows that the number of people working flexibly has risen, and we know that that's risen amongst working parents and carers too. So in our survey, 65% of respondents worked flexibly prior to COVID, and bear in mind this is a survey of parents and carers, so it was probably quite high anyway, and 84% have been working flexibly during COVID. I think the really important thing to highlight is that access to flexibility has not been evenly distributed. The Resolution Foundation has found that 44% of the lowest paid workers were working from home compared to 83% of the highest. And the other really important thing to point out, kind of linked to that, is that not all parents and carers have been able to work from home. You know, given that women are in low paid, more likely to be in more low paid and insecure employment, and given that they still take on majority caring responsibilities, they're much more likely to be negatively impacted in terms of their employment by COVID. So that's kind of a bit of landscape for you. A couple of other kind of interesting insights from our survey. What we really learned from it was parents' intent. So their aspiration is to continue working flexibly. You know, they've enjoyed the autonomy they've been given around how to organise their work, around their childcare, as you would expect, given that formal and parents haven't had access to informal or formal childcare since the beginning of lockdown. The flexible working that they're doing hasn't delivered the same wellbeing benefits that we would expect if parents were able to access their usual childcare arrangements. What we're really interested in as part of this campaign is how this desire to continue to work flexibly can really be bedded down. The government, we would like the government to be really proactive around this. There have been previous commitments to advertising jobs flexibly as the norm, and we'd really like this government to act on those commitments and to make sure that what it does in this space engenders better job design amongst employers, because better job design is really important in terms of delivering work-life balance for parents. Otherwise, all that flexibility really confers is the flexibility to juggle too much. So job design is really important too. We sort of asked about their plan, what they plan to do as well. So we found that almost half of parents and carers we spoke to plan to make changes to their flexible working patterns after COVID. And what that really kind of suggested to me and kind of made me think about was the right to request flexible working. So that's parent and carers' right, really, in this space. And, you know, it really struck me that, you know, employers were able to deliver flexible working for parents and carers in record time when we went into lockdown. But under that right, they have 3 months to consider a flexible working request. Now that feels quite outdated to me. So we'd really like that right to be looked at and strengthened. You know, parents and carers need flexibility from day one in their new job, yet there's a 26-week qualifying period. And so I think what COVID has exposed is that right is feels quite rusty. And then the last thing, just to pick up on this point about women again, we'd really like the government to be more proactive around creating more secure, genuinely flexible jobs, including part-time jobs, to support women who we know are going to be more negatively affected in terms of their employment by COVID into better work. So what we really want to say in this campaign is let's build on the progress really that's been made to get parents and carers working with more autonomy. Let's bed that in, start to flex the UK. So that's all I wanted to share. There is a real kind of silver lining here. You know, I think I'm about to have a child come on to this presentation, and there's children popping up everywhere, and it's just absolutely brilliant to see. The visibility of the juggle has never been higher. Home working is demonstrably possible in many, many more jobs than previously thought, and that kind of 9-to-5 model is looking sort of really outdated. So yeah, and my contact details are there if you want to get in touch with me and the policy team at Working Families. I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you so much, Julia. I did slightly panic when you said I'm about to have a child. I thought, oh gosh, and then pop up, when you said pop up, I understand now. It's all cleared up. Thank you so much. Hello, mini Julia. Oh, I love it. I love the waving hands. Really, really compelling insights. For me, I think some of the things that really stuck out from what you said there were about better job design. So, you know, more than policy. That statement, flexibility to juggle too much. Yeah, that sometimes feels like a reality. And also that point that you said, I think the fact that we've been able to respond in record time, yet there's a 3-month consideration period. I love the statement that you said about our rights feel rusty. That just feels rusty. I think it is such a poignant term, and I think they do. I think they really do. Hee-jung, I would absolutely love to pass over to you. If you wouldn't mind stopping sharing your screen, Julia, or I can stop it. I will stop it in a second. Julia, would you mind stopping sharing your screen? Thank you. But yeah, if we could hand over, Hee-jung, I know that you've done a huge amount of research in your work around flexible working. How does what Julia share compare with your insights? Are there any new things that you're finding particularly through this time?
Yeah, thanks. So I've been working on flexible working for over a decade, and so some of the things that I'm going to be talking about is based on a lot of data from the UK, but across Europe and the world on flexible working, but also a lot of the insights that we've found during the COVID lockdown. We've run a survey as well. We're still kind of looking into it, so I'm not going to be sharing much of that, but a little bit of that. But also there has been a lot of different data and sources and stories, a lot of stories coming out from across the globe about what this COVID and lockdown and this new world of flexible working has meant for lots of people. And I mean, just a couple of things to note. Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, the genie is out of the bottle. People have changed their attitudes towards flexible working dramatically. So we're talking not just managers who once thought, and this is the biggest reason why managers would not let workers work flexibly, because they said the work is not possible to be done at home, or it's not possible to introduce flexi time. And I think given the situation that it was a matter of choice between either you let workers work from home or work flexibly, or no work will be done, suddenly there was that kind of snap. Everybody was able to do work from home. And through that, I think a lot of managers are realizing actually a lot of the work that we thought may be due to what they think as the nature of work, but also just because possibly the lack of trust that workers will carry out their work sufficiently at home has disappeared, because despite the extraordinary conditions that we're in with the school closures, nursery closures, but the inability to actually outsource a lot of the, you know, housework and other types of work that we relied on to carry out our daily lives, workers have been able to carry out a good chunk of their work efficiently and productively. But this has also been an opportunity for workers themselves to feel that, oh, actually, I do like this. I do like kind of working from home. And surprisingly, I'm actually able to carry out more than I thought I would, because in the previous study I've done, there's a flexibility stigma, not just amongst managers, but amongst workers, that, flexible workers make more work for us, or they're not as committed, or they can't do as much work. And I think this has been a kind of awakening call for many. Having said that, I think, again, these are extraordinary times. So we're really struggling to try to get everything done, because now you are mom, or dad, but you're also a teacher and carer. And we talk about working parents with children, but we have to also think about people who have, caring responsibilities for their elderly parents or relatives. And that has been not just a physical time burden, but an incredible emotional burden on people. So what we do see is that people have had, been under a lot of stress, and there has been a lot of blurring of boundaries where people are just really trying to juggle everything. The recent IFS study has shown how I think approximately like 40% of a mom's time is multitasking at work with childcare roles, etc. And these are things we need to think about. Going on to that gender part, I think, again, the attitude towards wanting to work flexibly is great. And I think one of the things we need to think about is, at this time, a lot of the cases, at least up to this point, and this is a quickly moving context, both parents were able to work from home. And only then were actually some mothers were able to carry out some of their work, although that wasn't always the case. And we know, and increasingly we are, finding out that despite fathers taking on more than previously, the additional burden of care and housework has been laid on women. In the longer term, because we're looking into a situation where come September, there will be changes, but not all children will be in school all the time, and we cannot rely on after-school clubs or breakfast clubs. What is this going to mean? It means that for those who are able to work from home, work flexibly, there will be a matter of, unless you let both parents, men and women, or both men and women, even if who are not parents, work from home, you're going to see an exodus of women dropping out of the labor market. This is due to the gender pay gap. Women will be the second earners in most households, as well as, it will be that it is assumed it's the mother's role or the women's role to take care of elderly parents. So what we really need to think about now is not just getting women's flexible working done, but trying to persuade managers to look at fathers as carers or men as carers, but also ensuring that all workers, not just mothers and fathers, but all workers are able to work flexibly, because if not, you're going to be actually risking the loss of a huge group of the labor force. And this is something that we really need to seriously think about, given that this whole COVID isn't going to magically disappear come September or even in the future.
Hee-Jung, thank you so much for sharing that. And Emma, I would love to bring you in, particularly on this gender point and how we level the playing field. Emma's written a really good article that I highly recommend. Is the coronavirus taking women back to the 1950s? And in that article, there's you raise a really interesting point that I wrote down about the two-tier workforce that really struck with me, about the people that are having this juggle, having maybe they're caring and their parents and they're working, and then the people that might not have that, or that might have other support, and that this creates a gap in our workforce that we shouldn't accept. And I'd love to get your insights from the work that you've been doing here, and any things that might be working, any kind of early lights of things that we should be doing differently.
Hi. I think what struck me when you talk to people is how different everyone's experience is, and that kind of depends on what age their kids are, whether they've got a partner, whether they're both sharing, whether they can afford, as we go into the next bit, whether they can afford extra childcare. So it's really exposed the differences in people's home life and how it affects their work. And I think the next bit, as Hee-Jung was talking about, is going to be the hardest bit to manage, because in a way, the pandemic hasn't been an equalizer, but at least most people were out the office in white collar jobs. And now the next bit is much more of a divided workforce, and that's really going to show the difference in company culture and how they think about bringing women into work. And one of the things that struck us, I wrote this article with Laura Noonan in the US, was how policies are really beautifully laid out. They look great on paper, companies extol them, and then actually the day-to-day is very different. You know, women were talking about, you know, we can do it where there's 5 women here, we can bring our kids on, but women were talking about how it was kind of cute when the father did it, but less cute and slightly more annoying when the mum was doing it. And also that these women that I've spoken to have said that there was a kind of, there was an excitement sort of at the beginning that we were trying this mass experiment, but now people have got over it. I mean, we've all kind of hit a wall at various points in managing this. I can see lots of enthusiastic nodding. And but actually managers kind of have run out of steam a bit, and you know, and some women that I've spoken to have said very much that they're not sympathetic anymore, that their kind of patience has run out with it, and actually their experience, their home life hasn't changed at all. If they've not got kids back at school, they're still doing the same situation and they're still doing this juggle. So the things that work are, and also there's a kind of, there has to be a kind of proactive, we can make this work. My worry about this experiment is that it will have reinforced to a lot of managers that we can't make this work, that actually in these very unusual times where people were homeschooling kids and doing, you know, and looking after elderly relatives, that actually all it's done is shown them that this is a very difficult situation to manage. And so their lesson will be bring everybody back into the office, you know, and rather than say, you know, how can we make this work? A lot of people, as Hijin was talking about, and Julia, a lot of people will have had very positive experiences in some aspect. I mean, most of us probably have hit a wall at various points, but but you know, how can we build on those good bits and try and really make this work, rather than say this clearly didn't work, we all have to go back in the office. And as Hijin was saying, as people go back to, some people go back to school and others aren't, you know, which, you know, who knows what's going to happen in September. You know, that's a long time to be patient with people and say, you know, we have to kind of bed it down and see how this next 6 months is going to work and start making plans, rather than kind of seeing this as a sort of temporary blip that we have to get over.
I think it's so interesting, and when you talk about this flex in flux, and that there is a risk if we don't really look at, you know, job design, Julia, like you're talking about, the role of men, the skills that managers need to do this. There is a risk that this goes backwards, because maybe that's easier than going forwards, but that's not really better for anybody in the long run. And so I do feel like it's a really interesting inflection point. And Jennifer, from the direct line context, I think obviously, you know, as Julia talks about, every organisations responded so quickly because they had to. They were forced to respond so quickly, and those policies of 3 months of consideration were no longer possible. So how do we go from emergency change that people have put in place to sustainable, flexible ways of working that make it accessible and fair for everybody? Is there anything that you're learning about from obviously the work you were doing at Direct Line, or anything you've seen through organisations that might be talking to, that you think helps us to shift from that emergency to a more of a sustainable embedded change?
Yeah, so I think terminology is quite important. So, you know, when we talk about that emergency phase and suddenly everyone's working from home, it's working from home, it's not necessarily home working. And I think actually distinguishing between the two, where you're in this, it is a temporary state, albeit it's been prolonged. I think quite a lot of employers, because you had to, so there wasn't much time to think about, could you? It was about, let's just get everybody home and sort of work it out as we go along. Depending on your business and your sector, there would have been risks that are associated with that as well. So organizations do have to consider that, you know, the whole infrastructure, their operation, what risks they're willing to take as they go through this. And I think what we have actually is an opportunity to learn from our emergency state and actually to give us confidence about what is possible rather than fear for what isn't possible. And I think actually what employers should be doing is, and it will be different for different businesses, and we accept that, but I think it's thinking about what you learned through the emergency phase. Speak to your people, speak to your managers. If you have a huge operational part of your business, really interrogate and think about how you were able to move those systems home. Did it work? How do your people feel about it? So I think there is probably more space for conversation than maybe we've had before, and really getting that, I guess, real-time feedback. And that's feedback from the implementers as well as the receivers, right? So that you can fulfill both sides of the coin. I think actually when you're thinking about home working versus working from home, and all the points that Juliet raised, actually all of our panelists have raised about job design, infrastructure, childcare, what's that going to look like? So I know we keep talking about the quote unquote new norm, whatever that's going to look like. I think whatever it is isn't going to be like what we used to do. And I think we kind of have to just accept that, even though we haven't got all of the answers right now. So I think when you're considering what your long-term sustainable action plan is, I think it's about choice. And I think it's about having several options for your people, your employees, your colleagues, so that they can choose. And actually from a, I guess, leadership and management level, and really looking at the infrastructure of the business, yes, they can take that role of finding the art of the possible rather than fear of the impossible. And have actually a design in mind that is based on that feedback from your people, from the managers that had to implement it, how that's felt. And then I actually think you can come up with quite a comprehensive solution that will be sustainable. I think we also have to, again, as been raised already, is whatever happens in the next 6 months to a year, it's going to be some sort of a hybrid model. So you don't have this, I don't think you have purity either way. So you're not going to have purity in the office and you're not going to have purity at home. And so businesses really need to think, what does that mean? And actually, beyond job design is actually your traditional working hours. What are those? And again, this will differ from job role, from industry and sector. But I think it's for leaders to really challenge themselves and say, actually, if we had to start with a blank piece of paper, because I think quite often we try and put a plaster on something or we just try and morph it a bit. Actually, if you had to start with a blank piece of paper, what would that structure look like? What would that role look like? What would those working hours look like? And I suppose for the businesses that are more, our business is 50% customer facing, call center, they're on the phones to customers. So there is structure around that. There's hours around that, and there are challenges around that. But I think what we found, and also keeping in mind, those people have never worked from home in that capacity of that job. So this was a first for a lot of them. And I think it's for a lot of people, they love it. Some people don't. And again, this is why I go back to choice. I don't think we should make assumptions either way, or assume that home working is the holy grail that solves everything. Everybody has a completely different situation at home, and that's why the listening piece, I think, is really, really important. And where you can, providing as much choice as you can within the scope of those roles in that area of business. And my last point last couple of points I think are really interesting, back to, the quote unquote new norm. We still can't forget about the employee experience. So, the nature of my role is really thinking about connections and how you connect people to the business that they work in and vice versa. And the danger is when you have a hybrid model or where we're in our current state where you have the majority, if not all of your people working at home, quite often, your leaders are worried and concerned, and yes, we have to keep the business going and keep the work going. But please don't lose the experience of your people and the connection with your people. You still need people to feel motivated. I think even in a hybrid model, you want your organization to be thought of as a whole, not the ones that go into the office and the ones that are at home. You want it to feel like a whole organization. And actually within that whole, people are just flexing back and forth where they work. And I think that would normalize it. I think that would move it away from women. I think it would move it away from caring, and actually the debate, hopefully in the long term, won't become about caring responsibilities and the role of the female in the home or in the office. It will become about actually, here is your whole life. How do you flex between that and your whole work life? And how is your employer helping you to facilitate that? And within that, yes, you will have different responsibilities, some of which may be caring, some of which no. There are a lot of your workforce that aren't parents or carers yet, or never will be. And we have to think about them as much as we think about our families. And I think that is the way to push this agenda forward in more areas, in more sectors, and amongst more roles. So I would say definitely don't forget about that. And my absolute last point, and we've already talked about our fathers and the men, you know, some of the conversations I've been having, and it's easy to do, is jump to those assumptions that it's the female in the house that's doing the caring and the homeschooling. And in a lot of cases, we do know that's true. But I've also been hearing from fathers who actually want to take part in their children's lives. And actually they're feeling a stigma to be able to even talk about that in the office or bring that up or ask for it or even mention it. So I think for a lot of our men, they're probably discovering a way of life that they haven't had to before. And actually they want to be part of it. So we should be facilitating that as for our men as much as our women. And that's why when I think about flexibility, and obviously I know my role is on working families and we're always thinking about families, but actually the benefit it could have for families if it was for everyone, I think would be immense.
And that's a very, very powerful note to end on. I'm just going to do kind of a last question, put it out to Hee-Jung and Emma and Julia, actually, just about this making it stick point. Because Jennifer, when you were talking, some of the words that you were talking about, like hybrid, blank piece of paper, interactive, choice, I mean, I love those words. They're amazing, but I can imagine they're quite scary for some organisations, especially some hierarchical organisations who have found the way to make things work when you have a distributed workforce, you know, process and policies, and that helps us to get everything lined up. And choice and iterative and hybrid models might feel like that's a harder thing to manage. I just, in that context, I don't know, Hee-Jung and Emma, maybe Hee-Jung first, is there anything that you're learning, the points that Jennifer was talking about, making this stick and making it sustainable, or whether it's leadership or anything, our case studies, anything, role models, not sure, but is there anything that you have seen in the people that you've talked to, the research that you've done to help us, you know, make this change sustainable? For Hee-Jung, if I just go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, can I just say, Jennifer, everything you said, I just loved. You know, it was just like everything. It was just like jewels. But I mean, like really, I do feel like there's a couple of things, and I think what you're talking about. So how does it stick? One of the reasons flexible working, despite the legal changes that have occurred since its introduction in 2003 up to the point when in 2014 all workers have access to it, legal access to it. Why hasn't there been such an explosion? It's because of the culture and stigma and the way that it's been introduced in the legal terms, but also in organizations. It's still used as a diversity tool. It's still used as a work-life balance tool, without actually thinking about what its goal is. And I think, Jennifer, you really put it beautifully, where it's really about, you know, putting it on a blank piece of paper. What is work? What is meaningful? What are some of the key goals, key kind of performance indicators that we want to meet? And how can we make sure to get there without relying on our very old work culture where bums on seat for 9 to 5 or 6 or whatever. These are very old traditions that are not actually scientifically evidence-based in terms of what works to make organizations and people work better. So again, there's a huge stigma against it. And Jennifer, you did talk about the femininity stigma, especially for fathers. It's about flexibility stigma, about how flexible workers don't work as hard or are not as motivated. And is one of the reasons why there's such a huge level of flexibility stigma is because it is seen as something mothers do to do work-life balance. To change that, and this is what happens in some of the companies who have made it work, is that it's a performance tool. To change it into something where flexible working is benefit for work-life balance, but primarily is to try to meet organizational goals and key performance indicators in being more productive, motivated, having loyal workers. And again, the evidence is there, but culturally, we're still not there in understanding that flexible working is actually something that we could use to meet all these goals. And again, how can we get there? And it's the C-suite, the leaders have to understand that this is a part of a larger kind of an implemented tool to make enhance performance, and that you need to trust workers. And underlying thing that we really need to think about is that to be able to do this, and again, I keep referring to Jennifer, is that you need to talk to workers and understand that workers are not skivers, and then they're not necessarily only going to try to benefit their leisure, but they actually have an embedded interest in making the organization better. And the more you trust them and try to get them involved in trying to talk about what do you want, what can make you work better, what is the context in which you're embedded in outside the workplace? Maybe care, but maybe other things. It might be that you're involved in the community, at your church, whatever it is. What can we do to make it better? And then also be very frank about these are some of the criteria that I feel like we should meet, and what is yours, and try to make around. And again, as Julia said, have a new job design. But it's really difficult, and one of the reasons why people haven't done it yet is because it's really, really difficult. It is about really changing everything around, and a lot of managers are still dealing with the firefighting of day-to-day stuff. So then you need to really think about, especially in these times of pandemic, maybe think, this might be a really good opportunity for organizations and just, working groups to think about what is the main goals that you want to meet. What are some of the main jobs that needs to be done, and how can we better meet it? Because without that change in culture, in terms of how you should work and what is good work and what is good working culture, this whole flexible working introduced, it won't lead anywhere. So you would actually have, despite legal and even organizational policy, what Julie has mentioned in the beginning of her talk about how workers don't feel like it is accessible, because it's a career, a career suicide if you take it. So you don't want to have it in such a situation where policy is there, but you can't use it. Nationally, I think we can do much better to make it stick, to give it a bit of that push, much better in terms of protecting workers if they face negative career consequences when asking for flexible working. Because without that, there might be hesitation, especially from the some managers, in ensuring that these people don't get that kind of experience negative career consequences. So that needs to be done, but again, a lot of the work that needs to be done possibly is at the organization level, to again rip off the the paper, start with a blank piece of sheet, and then figure out what works for everyone.
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote, I've forgotten who it's attributed to, but the culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's like culture eats flexible working policy for breakfast. Like, we've got to get the culture bit fixed to make this stick. Emma, what's your perspective on sustainable change from flexible working?
Well, I agree with Hee-Jun that you need to keep talking to employees and try and understand the experience. And I've always been skeptical of kind of leading from the top and not leading from the top, but kind of leading by example. But I actually think over the next 6 months, a year, that's really important, because only then will they understand the kind of problems that are going to happen over the next few months. How do we not leave people out of conversations? How do we make inclusive, discussions at work? If your CEO or whoever is at home, you're going to have to find a way to do that. And I think it's going to make them much more conscious of how the experience is playing out for workers. But I think, as Hee-Jun was saying as well, we've got to be better at thinking about work. Where it's not worked in this period has been micromanaging, untrusting managers who have no understanding of the work that their employees are actually doing. Their objectives need to be much clearer. They need to be much clearer about what good work looks like, what isn't, what is being productive. Is it just sitting on their backside in an office for 12 hours a day, or is it producing something and having kind of, tangible outputs? So I really think that this period is a kind of a rethink. It is an opportunity. I mean, as much as terrible as it is, we can start again. We know we can do things at speed, at scale. We've just done it. We've been told that we can't do it. We can. So we need to look at these things. And I think actually, I was really disheartened about, in every crisis you hear the imperative is to stay afloat. Obviously, more jobs is better. But we saw with gender pay gap rules being, kind of being suspended for a year, that could become a very secondary measure. But with, perversely with Black Lives Matter, we can't just, companies are having to engage in these issues. They can't just say nice to have, or, these are issues that they're thinking about. They have to look like they're doing something, and they have to do something. I mean, I'm not, who knows how it will play out. I mean, I don't always, there are lots of nice statements, but I just think that they have to be much more engaged in work and people's experience of progressing in companies.
Thank you, Emma. And Julia, just before we go over to the Q&A, any other perspectives, anything you've seen from the research on making this stick, making it a lasting change?
I just to say, I agree with everything that's been said, really, and particularly what Hee-jung was talking about the right to request. So I think what we've seen with the right to request is that it's been great, and it has helped some parents and carers achieve the work-life balance that they need. But it is really retrofitting the role to the person. I agree with what Hee-jung said, and I agree that it's hard. I don't think it's easy to do, but I think organising work that can be done flexibly will really pay dividends for employers. So at an organisation-wide strategic level, focusing on job design, I think will help with a lot of other issues. I always think, women might not return to work after maternity leave because they have a flexible working request turned down. That's another barrier that organising work better might kind of help to break down. There's absolutely no point, well, not absolutely no point, but it undermines shared parental leave, doesn't it? If when a dad gets back to work, he can't work part-time and flexibly to be able to kind of progress in his career. So better job design and an organisation-wide approach to organising work that can be done flexibly, part-time, in a way that confers autonomy and more autonomy and control on parents will kind of really sort of pay dividends. The only other, I just wanted to kind of touch on gender, really. There's some really brilliant research that the Fatherhood Institute have just put out. I can put it in the chat. And that shows how much more childcare fathers are doing and have been doing since lockdown. And we had a father contact us recently saying, I have been targeted for redundancy because of my caring responsibilities, but there isn't anything I can do, because a woman can say, look, women take on the majority of care, this is sex discrimination, and we would really like to see caring made a protected characteristic. We think that would really help empower parents and fathers as well. And also, we need to, this is wider than COVID really, but we have fathers have a tiny amount of paternity leave compared to women's maternity leave. Obviously there's the option to take shared parental leave, but that means that the mother is willing to transfer her maternity leave to her partner. So I think that there's some kind of rebalancing around that kind of needs to happen. And just final point really from me is that I genuinely, unwieldy jobs, and I don't know how kind of strong this is going to sound, but they discriminate against parents because parents do not always want to put in the discretionary effort that seems to be required to get on at work. And unless jobs are designed better, and unless more people are working part-time and flexibly, it's going to be really difficult for parents to be on a level playing field with other workers. So that's
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank
two
you.
penneth worth.
No, I think it's a really important two penneth worth, and I think making sure that we are, you know, representing the rights of men in this conversation as well is hugely important. And yeah, so thank you for sharing those points with us. We're going to move on to Q&A now. So if you are watching this and you have a question, I've got some that have already come through, so I'm going to put these to our panelists now. But we've got about just over 10 minutes for this, so please, if you have got some questions that you would like to hear from Hee-Jung or from Jennifer, Emma or Julia, please put them in. And Jennifer, I'm going to come to you first with this question, if that's okay. Have you got any tips on how to keep the employee experience positive and the organisation whole, that concept they talk about, this whole organisation, when you've got a mix of employees requiring different flexible options?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So I'm going to start with storytelling, which might sound cliche, but it's my background and I really, really believe in it. And one of the things that has worked for us really well, so we've got a mix of what you'd call sort of head office-y desk type roles. We've got traditional roles where people would be out on the field, although they're not quite doing that exactly yet. And then we've got call center staff. So and we are national, so we're across the UK. So we do have different audiences we need to talk to. So I think well, I took an approach in sort of storytelling and sharing from the top, but also within. So for us, it was about from the time we went into lockdown, we started with, what's life like? How is it for you? And that's not just the glass half full version, but it's the challenges. It's showcasing the changes people have had to make in order to be able to do their work or have caring responsibilities. That has had a huge impact. And actually we're having conversations in a way that we didn't before, even when we were face to face. And I do think also, by doing that, that's in writing, but also we started extending that to when we had our all employee calls. So again, you're getting a different perspective around the whole organization every time we met as a group. So that real live storytelling, and that could be anything from, I'm struggling, I'm loving it, this is how I was able to help a customer. Everything we try and cover so that our people kind of get a real live experience of that. And then we've also done a version of that to spotlight our senior leaders as well, because I do think there's to normalize this, I think there's still this whole misconception. It can go both ways. So either the more senior you are, of course you've got choice because you can just say you're going home, or you can do that. But if I'm on a shift and I have to work from A to B, I can't make those choices myself. So I think there is a misconception that it's somehow easier sometimes if you're more senior. And I'd agree that probably it's easier for you to enforce what you want to do, but it might not necessarily be easier to actually do the job. So sharing a real view from the top, getting our CEO and our other exec members to show how challenging it's been for them has also helped. And I think that seeps into the well-being space as well. So not just, again, glass half full, but what isn't working? And this goes back to my learning piece. So if we want this to be sustainable and a long-term solution, you have to also understand where your people are struggling and also how you can help them navigate through that. So I think there's a real well-being piece and caring piece that goes with this as well, which gives people the confidence and the trust to also speak up when it's not working.
Brilliant.
Hope that helped.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it does for people. We've had a couple of questions come through from different people, one from Lynn Murphy and one from anonymous attendee, but it's about the disadvantages. Actually, it's about the disadvantages of flexibility. So Lynn talks about, are there any impacts on physical health and activity when people are working from home that we need to be aware of? And somebody else has asked, are there any disadvantages? And if there are, how do we need to monitor them to make sure that people are okay and that flexible working is okay despite the disadvantages? Maybe Emma and Hee-Jung, I don't know if you've got a perspective on that. Hee-Jung, if I go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that you notice is that lots of people want flexibility, and I think all the panelists said it's about choice. Having the option to work flexibly is a really kind of an empowering tool. Having said that, not everybody wants to be working from home 5 days a week all the time. And one of the key reasons, and again, this is based on some of the early kind of data that we've got from our survey, is that people feel isolated when working from home because we tend to forget that in the workplace, we're talking about the workplace, oh yeah, bums on seat, 9 to 5 is horrible. But there's a whole wealth of kind of positive things that come out that we don't really necessarily intend to have, but then it comes out, as a side item. That comes out, which is about the water cooler talks, having kind of that informal conversation, being able to just walk up to a colleague to ask a very small question without having to write an email, etc. And these are things that people miss, these social interactions, and also just being physically with each other, which has psychological impact as well as obviously the bigger problem is about being able to have a very clear physical, temporal boundaries between work and family life. And as Jennifer said, it's about choice. We need to make sure that those who want to work this way or don't want to work this way have the choice. But also, another thing is, if there is more people working from home or working flexibly, where a lot of this kind of good, positive working in the office culture disappears, then you need to, especially managers and organizations, but also workers themselves, have to intentionally try to maintain that some other way. And it could be online, and as Jennifer said, maybe storytelling amongst people to ensure that that kind of bonding is there. Or it could be some of the Silicon Valley tech companies that are completely remote. So there is no physical offices. They intentionally have 1 month or a few weeks, where they get together and just do that physical bonding. So rather than working in the office 11 months a year and having 1 month off on holiday, what they do is they work from home 11 months a year, and 1 month they get together and do all the meetings, but also do lots of fun things so that they feel a bond within the company, and that physical bond is really important.
I think that's fascinating. Like a completely different way of thinking about the office. It definitely rejuvenates it, wouldn't it? Emma, any thoughts on the disadvantages of potentially the ways that people are working now and how we are aware of them and maybe monitor them?
I mean, clearly being interrupted by your kids while you're trying to work is a problem. But for young people at the start of their career, I think working from home without being able to talk to people with more experience or get the lie of the company culture or kind of understand networks, and be in a kitchen table with 5 other flatmates who you might not actually even like, and they're your colleagues, that's a real problem. So I think that I think it is a shift, a kind of mix and match, but I think there does need to be some face-to-face. This is a kind of interesting time for virtual experiments in terms of socializing. I've heard lots of complaints about these virtual sessions. People see them as a kind of, not everybody, but some people see them as a kind of additional stress, which further blurs the kind of work-life divide. Somebody was talking to me about having a virtual bake-off, and she was just like, the last thing I want to do is bake a cake which no one's going to be able to eat except for me, so I'm going to finish the whole cake on my own. And and this is something I actually enjoy doing, but now it's a work thing, and it's a kind of it's another stress. It doesn't kind of work. So I think there's a kind of, people have to be open and honest to what does work, rather than kind of top down, we're all going to have scheduled fun now and this is how we're going to meet each other. I mean, these things don't really work. There needs to be much more kind of discussion about it. But I mean, I haven't yet come up with it.
It's a whole new theme, isn't it? Blurred baking boundaries. It's a different issue entirely. And we've just got a few minutes. Julia, I'm going to come to you with two questions, if that's okay, in the time that we've got left. I know, sorry, I'm putting the pressure on you. The first one was from Michaela. Any guidance or anything that we can point people to, maybe on the Working Families website, about how job specs can be adapted to make them more accessible? So that's question one. The second question is from Don, and it's just about any thoughts on carers. And he makes the point that with kids, it's an easier ask because it's visible, but maybe if you've got caring responsibilities, maybe for elderly parents, that might feel harder to ask. So either some thoughts that you've got now, or a place that we can direct both Michaela and Don to find out a bit more would be brilliant.
I think on Michaela's question, Michaela, there's lots and lots of free resources on our website that you can access for free. Obviously, you can always think about joining Working Families. We have an excellent kind of membership scheme to offer kind of more bespoke support to you and your organisation. We also have a toolkit specifically for carers, Dom, that you'll be able to find on our website. And I suppose just to say to Dom that yes, I absolutely agree. I think that, you know, we asked parents in the Modern Families Index about their levels of comfort around being able to be honest about their elder care responsibilities versus their childcare responsibilities, and parents were what we learned was that parents were much more comfortable talking about their childcare responsibilities to their employer. There are lots of excellent examples of employers really offering good support to carers. Centrica, there's some great case study examples, John, that you could share with your employer on our website. And I know that it's something the government is looking at around carers leave. From a policy perspective, we're expecting an employment bill later in the year that we see as a bit of a Christmas tree to hang all our policy asks on, basically. But I know carers leave is in the mix there.
Thank you so much, Julia. And we're at the end of our time together now. I just wanted to distill, whenever I'm listening to webinars, I try and think about what are the words that I've heard most, because that's the stuff that sticks with me afterwards. And so there were 5 words that I was writing down as everyone was talking. These are the words that I heard most that are going to stick with me to help flexible working to be fixed and fair for all, and not just in Flux forever. So I wrote down trust. That came up a lot. I wrote down experience, talked about the experience of work, that individual experience. I wrote down listening. Like, this is a time for a lot of listening. I wrote down design, like we need to think about how we design the work for people, and choice. And you might have your own 5 words, but they're the 5 words that I'm taking away with me from this session. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Hee-Jung and Jennifer and Emma and Julia. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, and also thank you for all the work that you are doing day in, day out on this for everybody. It makes a huge difference to our education and our ability to make sustainable change. So thank you very much. For everybody else, what happens next? You will be getting an email from Working Families. Please do stay close to Working Families. We're launching the Flex the UK campaign. Please get involved in that. You can find more about that on workingfamilies.org.uk. There are materials, there are toolkits to help you with flexible working in working families and carers. And just if this is something you're passionate about and you want to be an advocate for this in work, it's all there for you. It's all on the website. Thank you so much for joining us today. You'll also get a copy of this video in that email. So if you want to watch it again, you can do. If you want to share it with other people, you can do. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully you have a brilliant rest of your Friday, and we'll all be back with our flexible working missions from next week. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.